125 here to engage with a conversation. Now, I don't call it a debate. I don't think that I have enough knowledge as I did in, say, the US general election, where I put like months of my time in, where I had basically nothing better to do. Nowadays, I want to address the UK elections coming up in like 2 weeks in layman terms, right? So, terms for common people like you and I, right? So, first of all, I'm just going to tell you who I'm going to vote for, and I'm going to make reasons clear in like several make sense reasons, right? So even if you're a Tory or whatever, you'd be like, fair enough. Even if you're a Lib Dem, you'd be like, fair enough. If you're a Labour member, you'd be like, fair enough. If you're a Green member, you'd be like, fair enough. If you're UKIP, you'll be like, fair enough. Thought I counted all the major parties in there, but, you know, there's also the little fringe parties. Without getting in tangents, I'll just tell you this. I'm going to be voting Labour. Mainly because I am principally economically more to the left than, say, to the right. And I think, you know, Labour to me captures the ideas that I think are better for the country. Now, this is kind of principle but kind of practical. So before you people who are against me, Tories, Greens, whatever, turn off your screens, nice rhyming, I'm going to be practical in saying why Labour is good. Right? So, with Labour, or in fact, all the parties, they're proposing increased spending. In the end, the Tory case right now is, we care more for the economy, we care more for this, we care more for that. But their actions just go counter to that. So I'm going to tackle the Tory clash first, because that's the most important clash, really. That's the sort of people who are expected to win right now. And who I think, you know, have a good shot at winning, actually, still. Despite a lot of their gaffes that are really narrowing their polls down. Alright. Regardless of all that, I'm just saying this. Tories who care about economy, go ahead and put a Brexit referendum down. Tories who care about people, apparently, cut down elderly services, cut down on try and gut school meals, cut down more things. And then basically they realize they messed up, so they're doing U-turns on all these decision making. Now, I won't call that strong and stable. I don't call it strong and stable to provide, you know, only 2 billion more to the healthcare. Now, I'll say only 2 billion like it's chump change, but for a national health service, it is chump change. It is a fifth of the chump change that they need to even stay afloat. At least Labour is providing that chump change. At least Labour is committed to increasing services as they need to be, just adjusting them. It's not radical, it's not communist to say things like, we need to keep up the services which we all treasure as a country, right? It's not radical to have my health services protected. It's not radical to have our health services protected. It's not radical. So, you know, 0 out of 5 communist sickles, if I want to use the Sun's ratings, right? I mean, what are they going to call the Conservatives communists now for that, right? That's the first thing. All parties are raising money. All parties are raising spending. The Tories are still in this notion of, we want to eventually bring the deficit down. And that's never going to happen by the looks of it. This is a red pill to take. For a red wall, rather. Whichever you prefer. We ain't going to get the deficit down anytime soon. And I'll tell you, the last time we were making a surplus was in a Labour government. The last time we were. And I'll say this as well. This notion of Labour being wank with the economy, you know, sure, increased spending compared to Conservatives is obviously not ideal, but think of this. To depict the Labour Party as a bad economic force because the prime mortgages of 2008 caused us a recession during what happened to be a Labour government is the equivalent of saying Conservatives are crap with police services. Conservatives are crap with anti-terrorism because terrorist attacks have trebled or times 5 or whatever. There have been loads more terrorist attacks under Tory governments than the Labour government. It's like saying that. You know how ridiculous that sounds. So what I'm doing here is I'm just taking down that economic argument that people make about Labour's weakness. The main one anyway. Of course, principally lower taxes is better for people, but it's not as if the Tories are even lowering taxes much anyway. Right? Meanwhile, what Labour's doing is through their measures, they're making sure that, the rich, the people who are rich in the top 5% of the population are paying, like, to people above 80 grand, above 100 grand, right? Depending on which policy. They're paying a tiny bit more, like a few percentage more, right? And corporation tax, which is right now some of the lowest in the UK, it's just going to be reversed back to what it is. And even amongst the rich countries, it'll still be one of the lowest under Labour proposal. So I don't think this argument of competitiveness being spurred by giving rich people even more tax breaks is that holds much ground. When right now we still have tax avoidance. We even under these low rates, it just goes to show that as low as the rates as you put, we're just making less revenue. We're making less revenue because these people keep going to Luxembourg and Ireland and shit like that, and then getting away with it impunity. Despite the Tories, onslaught of being the tax collectors, And there is stable business that isn't affected, like most of business here in the UK, that for its location, for its connections, for whatnot, which mind you Tory governments have undermined with Brexit, they will stay here for that. Whether the tax rate is what it is right now, 19%, or what the Labour represents, 23%. Quite a little gap, you think? Quite a little gap, right? Right. Now on to the other parties. I think the Green Party mirrors much of what Labour stands for. It takes a bit more extra stances in like making the environment more an active role. And I think the Greens have great scope to like partner up with Labour in a lot of those issues. So I'm not against the Greens actually. I just think those votes should be put in Labour. Because I think Labour's intentions, or at least in their leadership, is genuine. I think when you produce such a comprehensive and even I would call in some respects radical proposals to bring about the change we want, like renationalising railways, that's something that all the left-leaning parties should rally behind, because we know, as left-leaning parties know, public services that are monopolised just get their prices shot up in a private enterprise. Whereas in public, at least you're not having yourself being gouged by your own government, because you're a shareholder of that government. You're not necessarily a shareholder of Arriva, which mind you is run by the German government, who coincidentally enough has the mind to make their services mostly public there as well. So, with all that said, it's a no frills argument. Also, renationalising Royal Mail. It's called Royal. I have no idea why it was privatised in the first place, just to make some chump change post-recession. There was no reason to really privatise it. And that's why you got all the unions all out in favour for it. Now, I'm going to account for the argument where people talk about the lower efficiency of services. I would say they're not much less efficient than the private sector. I would say for a near equivalent service or similar performance, it's always better to publicize. It's always better to go public. It's always better to go state-run, because that way you ensure that it serves you, not some shareholders in a room. All right? That's why principally I think Labour have done a good move here, and I think Greens want that as well. So Green Labour, it's working out quite well. I forgot the SNP, by the way, but I'm speaking from England. Scots, go for the SNP if you feel like it's representing your independence or whatever. Like, but honestly, Labour is going for much of the same left-leaning policies you guys are as well, and they have, with that power they have in Westminster, they can increase. They plan to increase that funding up in Scotland as well. So, you know, hey, I think the red background gave it away for how I feel, but I'm not a communist, am I? I'm reasonable here. I'm being reasonable. I'm being straightforward with you lot. Right. So, Lib Dems. Now, Lib Dems represent the vestige of Remainers in the party, in society. They represent those hard Remainers. But actually, I think, I think compared to that, if we want to tackle that Brexit argument head on about which party represents Brexit the most, I think Labour does, again, right? I know I'm probably being a Labour fanboy, it sounds like, but bear with me on this one, right? In Labour, right now, I mean, this could be a knock for Labour as well. There's no clear consensus on an opinion. The party line is accept the Brexit and try and make it the best we can to ensure that that economy is sustained, right? That economy that even the hardest Leave voters rely upon, as much as they might not want to admit it. You lot rely on that. You rely on the EU. We all rely on the EU for our economic interest. And trading with India and China more isn't going to compensate for our specialised economy like that. It won't. Right? That fruit, if you want that fruit of trading with India and whatnot, we could always do separate deals with India. We're not barred from that. It's just India's not been like too much of a market so far. I mean, we've already seen what India can bring to the UK, taking with Tata, taking over Jaguar and whatnot. So that's a decent market. China with Hinkley, you got all these little ventures going on already that being in the EU didn't really infringe upon too much, right? What you get with the EU, you get a specialised market, and that's worth fighting for. So I get what the Lib Dems want. They want that market guaranteed. They want those rights guaranteed. I want I want to be able to text without roaming charges when I'm on holiday in Europe. And that would come this June, by the way. So, get your flip-flops out, enjoy that. But regardless, because of that, I think Labour had many Leave representees and Remain representatives. So I think it represents the fabric of the country more than any other party. See, the Tories, they have that as well. I'm not going to knock that from them. But their leader, which is questionable in itself, was one of the leading Remainer campaigners. And then the second the Leave decision happens, she flips out. She's like, Brexit means Brexit. I'm a strong Leaver. And she's allying with the likes of mops like Boris Johnson and... Oh dear, man. Even a Tories in their party are gonna be like he's a very intelligent guy with questionable decisions, man. If your own party's mugging you off like that, then how can you bring this double standard of looking at a divided Labour Party? Now, granted, it's not to the same extent. I'm going on a tangent here, but regardless, both parties have their divisions, but I think Labour at least has more of an interest to not sell us off. They have more an interest to fight for us, right? That's why they've doubled down on Trident. Even though, Corbyn has been more realistic about saying, well, hold on, a nuke is not the best thing in the world to use. We'll use it at a last resort. We don't have a first strike policy here in the UK anyway. So all of May's talk about, oh, strike, that's all talk, right? That's all talk. There are so many precautions on that Trident. And Trident, it's tried and tested. Right? So, I don't think there's even an argument with that one. I think what we need to do is look past personalities. This is my conclusion. We need to look past personalities, May to me seems a bit dull, bit boring, very shaken by a few days of attacks when she's had so much cushy shit thrown at her for the past few years. She's had most of that media rallied around her and attacking Corbyn every second of the way. But Corbyn's just been strong. He's been stronger despite all of that. He's more passionate now than ever. He is more determined now than ever. That's what I call leadership, right? But, policy is what counts here. you're voting for the party. You're not voting for the personality behind it. Because Corbyn or May or whoever's in charge of the Greens, I forgot, whoever's in charge of the SNP, Nicola Sturgeon, they're not the ones spearheading all these policies through. They're not bringing these through. They have policy writers. They have the civil service behind them. They have their whole cabinets behind them. So look at those people. See if they represent you. And before you guys, and I want you lot to be not partisan in your thinking, because I've tried to not be partisan. I've approached this. My principle's taken things over, right? So I guess I'm partisan in that, right? But I admit there's loads of dirty laundry in all the parties. There's loads of it. And for me, principle knocked it over towards Labour. But for you, you know, principle could take you Tories if you're thinking, even that little 1% decrease in tax, even if all our private public services are fucked, I still got that 1% decrease in tax. I'm going to vote Tory. You know, even if you have that shit, at least you could consider the other parties, you know? And that's fair enough, alright? But I'm just going to tell whoever has their vote, don't bargain it away, right? I'm calling folks to vote Labour because they're in the interest for us all, man. All the parties are increasing spending, to be clear. All the main parties have strategies to cope with Brexit, to varying levels of realisticness, right? I think that Labour has the best solutions for them all. But this is a conversation. It's not a statement, you know. So don't be afraid to come back at me on my video response if you can be asked. If not, comment. You know, dislike, show me how you feel about my views. But till then, this has been Milo125. Cheers.